this is a pretty a deep topic, and one that George and I are particularly passionate about, having been exposed to Agile methods in the early 2000s via extreme programming, which obviously where TDD sort of comes from. But this session, intentionally, we're calling it being test-driven. We're not going to talk about just TDD or BDD or ATDD or whatever, but really just get into the essence of, we'll touch upon these practices, but what does it really mean for a team to be test-driven? And the reason we wanted to talk about this is a talk that we've talked about in the past. It's really not to talk about any brand new practices per se, because the practices that we're going to talk about have been around for a long time now. But what we see in our jobs as coaches and technologists is that there's a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation of what it means to be test-driven. And our hope is that we sort of shed some light on what the true spirit of being test-driven really is. All right.
We wanted to offer a little preview of the book that Audrey mentioned a little earlier. This is hitting bookshelves, virtual and otherwise, September 7th. So yeah, get in line now or sometime soon. All right, a little bit about us.
Yeah. I said there's not much that I haven't already said. I think for George and I have been sort of been spirited collaborators for a long time now. And like I said, sort of cut our teeth with Agile, with extreme programming as developers in the early 2000s. And right now, a lot of what we do is helping organizations trying to transition to Agile, not just from a process adoption, but also from engineering practices perspective, and bringing to bear some of the things that we've learned over the years and helping to deepen their Agile adoption with engineering practices. So that's what we do. And before we get to talking about test-driven, I want to ask the question to the group here. What do you think the point of being test-driven really is? You can shout out the answers. We have a sort of a small, intimate group here. Well, I guess there's 50% of participants, not so small, but either type it in or just shout it out. What does being test-driven really mean to you? Any thoughts? Audrey, are you pulling the chats?
I'm also looking at the chat to see if anything flows in. Nothing yet. Test early from Murali.
Test early, okay. Anybody else? What is the point of test-driven, or what does test-driven really mean?
All right, not waiting until code is done, validating development based on previously engineered tests. Think about testing during planning of features, faster delivery, better quality, get quality in early. Think about testing, shifting testing to the left, trust but verify, dev test running in parallel.
Okay, all right.
You skipped mine. It was going by really fast. I was trying to read as quickly as I can. Apologies. Converge on customers' true needs. I saw that one.
I like that one. I like that one. What are the true needs of the customers? What are the code tests? Okay, yeah. All right. Good answers all. So let's just move to the next slide. And then again, I'm going to have you chime in. What is the picture on the left really? Take a look at it. What do you think is going on? It's a pretty traditional SDLC, if you will. You have your business code, the analysts, the business owners. You have your developers. You have your testers. Maybe you have a tech writer on the going. But you have the necessary players, especially in a software development kind of an environment. You have the different roles here, and of course you have the customer. What do you think is really happening? What do you observe? Steve says handoffs. Yeah. Steve, handoffs from all the different players here.
Essentially, almost a sequential handoff with perhaps a little bit of iterative.
Yeah. So even if you're iterative, this could potentially happen. Okay. Anything else? So handoffs was one. Development and test are not linked. George, you'll have to read the whole thing. I can't see the whole.
Yeah, so test cases in development, manifestation of Conway's rule. No interaction between the developers and tester, errors go one way, lack of collaboration.
Okay, okay. So let me ask you this. I'm assuming a lot of you are probably in agile enterprises of some sort. Whether you're traditional or agile inspired SDLC, you see this sort of behaviors happening within your teams. There is this limited interaction, perhaps, among the different roles. Now, where do you think the tester is really crafting her test cases from in this picture?
And Marco says waterfall, which I think is, of course, an interesting observation. Largely because it is supposed to look like waterfall, but I've seen lots of agile teams that have this kind of process.
Yeah, and testing is based on requirements that are laid out there by our analysts. Maybe developers are coding against that, those requirements as well. Yeah, so whether you are following some agile frameworks from, say, you name the flavor, perhaps you still see this sort of behavior happening. We definitely do in our coaching roles for sure that this does happen even in the so-called agile teams. So now for a second, can you hit the next button, please?
Right. Okay. There we go.
Take a look at this picture. It's still the same players. What do you observe here? Take a minute to take a look at it. What do you observe here, and what might you infer from?
Everybody's working off the same sheet of music.
Everybody's working off the same sheet of music. Yes, right? The different perspectives, right? The business perspective, the technical implementation of the feasibility perspective, the validation perspective, everything is, we're working off the same sheet of music. What else is going on?
Joshua says collaboration and likely communication between the players. Dominic says the importance of documentation. Some domain-driven work. I believe that was also what Maru had earlier that I skipped over, sorry.
Anything else? Anything else?
Triad is going on.
Triad, and also the customer seems a little happier. Just following the process is going to make the customer happy or not remains to be seen, but I think that seems to be another distinction. And also there seems to be a certain emphasis here on these gears, so suggesting some sort of automation that this sheet of music is able to help with. We'll see that in a second, and not to say that you don't have any automation in the traditional SDLC that the picture on the left, but it seems like there's this enables it, or it's a part of the development process. So the picture on the right, rightful observations, more collaboration, shared understanding of what it is that we're trying to build, shared understanding of what we're testing, happier customers, seem to be all patterns that you might infer from the picture on the right. The question is this, the picture on the right, it sort of suggests a different way of organizing how we work together, same players. So the reason I'm showing this picture is because it's sort of, we're going to dig a little deeper in the next 10, 15 minutes as to what are the practices that can help us get to that state. Right? So this is where our conversation, the lens we're going to look at is behavior-driven development, BDD, and test-driven development, TDD, as ways that can help us reach this sort of a test-driven inspired process. So next slide, please. So the two aspects we're going to look at, we're going to look at what test-driven means from two perspectives. One is outside in, building the right thing. Are we even building the right thing? Somebody mentioned, oftentimes maybe we're not. Are we building what the customer really wants or not? Was one of the comments made earlier, right? So BDD is the outside in practice, was inspired by TDD, by the way. Dan Knott was a XP practitioner, practice test-driven development, which is obviously precedes this concept of BDD. But he drew inspiration from TDD when he sort of mentioned behavior-driven development. And it's a slightly different perspective where TDD is inside out, BDD is outside in, and focus on how we really building the right thing. And it tries to bring together those different players we looked at making sure that we have a shared understanding across those key perspectives before we actually write a single line code. So how does this really play out? Next slide, please. So BDD, as I mentioned, I won't read the little blurb here. In a sense, is inspired by TDD in many ways, but it's trying to broaden that to include more than just the developer perspective, bringing the testers or analysts, UX people, whoever is responsible for that delivery value stream, if you will. All the necessary roles are there. And obviously, we all have heard of few stories. They're pretty ubiquitous in the Agile space. So here, we're not going to really talk about how to write stories and all that, but what we're talking about is, do we have a shared understanding of what it means to build that need that's articulated in the story or not? So the BDD, there's really three distinct things that happen. There's this idea of this collaboration among these perspectives, documenting that they've reached a shared understanding. We document that. Can you hit the next slide, please? Oh, sorry.
You want the highlights, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
So it's the conversation to make sure that we're on the same page, and we're doing that through these rules and examples, which I'll show an example of in a second. Now, once we sort of have that shared understanding among those multiple perspectives, you then make sure we document them in some common language that's easily understood by both technical and non-technical people. And then finally, you could use that shared understanding, that documented shared understanding, to drive your automation. When I talk about automation, I'm not just talking about automating your functional tests. It could serve to automate the code that you're about to write, and also the unit test, preferably with the unit test driving the design that emerges for that code that you're about to write, right? So don't think of that last step, automation, as just being about automating your functional scenarios. That's not what it's trying to represent. It essentially helps drive automation at multiple levels. So, so let's take a look at this in greater detail. The next slide, please. So the first step, like I said, in the BDD process, the three-step process, the first one is making sure the right people are having the conversations before you write the code, right? How often have you been in situations where you've written stories in the Connexter format, as a blah, 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 all that, but you go into the sprint and then there's rampant misunderstanding as to what the boundaries of those stories are and so forth. That happens in most Agile teams. So what we're talking about here is making sure that you have those multiple perspectives. Bob Payne here, who I think was one of the folks along with George Dinwiddie who coined the term Three Amigos, I believe. But essentially, what we are alluding to is having at least three different perspectives: those of the business, those of the testers, and those of the developers. Making sure that those perspectives are present when you're having these conversations about these stories and features before you start pulling them into your sprint report. Right? And why are we doing that? We want to make sure that we have that shared understanding and all agree that this is ready to pull people in and right? That's the first step.
And I believe in the chat, there was a reference to a triad and a question about what the triad is. And if I understand what the reference to the triad was, this is what it would be. This is the Three Amigos.
And some people call it the triumvirate. So yeah, exactly, right? So again, so keep in mind when this was originally meant, they talked about the Three Amigos. These days, you hear about the 3+ amigos. What we're really saying is not necessarily three different people. We're talking about three different perspectives, right? The business perspective, the implementation perspective, the testing perspective. What you're seeing here is a technique called example mapping, super lightweight technique to essentially, it provides a way to structure the conversation among those, the triad or the Three Amigos or the triangle, right? Maybe the product owner, the analyst brings in the story that's represented as a yellow card. And the focus of that session, that conversation, is to really try to understand the boundaries of the stories. What does it mean? And you typically do that in this technique through rules and examples. Of course, I'm taking a very sort of ubiquitous story. As an admin, I need to be able to create a password that's not easy to crack. What does it mean? Not easy to crack, right? There's some concrete rules. What might those rules be, right? the blue stickies that you see underneath that yellow sticky, those are the rules, right? And these are pretty basic rules. And the green stickies that you see underneath each of the blue stickies are those examples, right? This is what when Dan Roth talks about, it's a conversation to make sure you understand that story through rules and examples. This is the kind of thing we're talking about, right? What is the boundary of the story, right? Make it a little bit more real than abstract. Now, if there's some open questions, hey, what's the, that's represented in red, right? Those are the red stickies. So in the conversation, you know, the triad is having this conversation. The end goal of this conversation is really say, is the story valuable from a business perspective? Is it feasible from a developer perspective? Can I actually do this? Can I validate this? Right? These are the three things you want to think about for any story, whether you follow this this particular technique or not. Now, what this lets you, what this provides, this conversation helps you provide is if there's too many red cards, there are too many open questions, you have no business trying to commit to that story. Maybe you need a spike of some sort. If there's too many blue cards, lots and lots of rules, maybe it influences the size of that story. Excessive green cards, same thing. Maybe there are lots of happy paths, unhappy paths. Maybe there's an opportunity to break that story, saying I may do the happy path this sprint, and maybe the next sprint I'm going to do the alternate path, whatever, right? So what it gives you is a very nice visual way in which you can start to slice and dice your stories and truly reach that shared understanding. That's the first part of the BDD process. Next slide, please. So once you reach that shared understanding, you know, you want to capture that shared understanding to make sure that you disseminate within the team. If your entire team is not participating in those conversations, right? At a minimum, we have those multiple perspectives, but we want to make sure that the team can sort of lean back on that shared understanding. Now, again, in the BDD process, it says capture these conversations in a common language. In a common language, meaning in a language that a technical person and a non-technical person, everybody can comprehend easily. And these days, it's become pretty common practice to use Gherkin as a way to, as that common language to capture these conversations to drive the design and development. Next slide, please. So, and maybe a lot of you here are already using Gherkin. It's a structured English keyword-based language for specifying those rules and examples. Rules, by the way, are nothing but your acceptance criteria, and those examples are nothing but your acceptance scenarios, right, in Gherkin parlance. So what the benefits of this is you've documented what the boundaries of those stories are. You have a clear direction for the team as to what it is that they're trying to implement, and it serves as documentation. And oh, by the way, there are tools such as SpecFlow and Cucumber that can actually understand the Gherkin syntax and giving you a path towards automation. So too often, when you talk about BDD, people say Cucumber, it's about testers doing automated testing. Not quite. As you can see, right, that's one part of the story, but not the whole thing at all, right? So maybe you don't choose to automate these functional scenarios using Cucumber. So be it, right? You still get a lot of benefit with those conversations and documenting that in common language, because this serves as a guidance for yet another practice we're going to look at, which is around using unit tests to drive the design and development, which is a process. Okay, so that's the second part of BDD, is that formulation. Okay, next slide, please. There
we go. Sorry.
And last but not least, is where now you're ready to, you have the shared understanding, you've documented the that shared understanding using Gherkin or something else, and now you're trying to automate. When I talk about automating, as I said, it's the Gherkin specifications, it could be a unit test, it's the actual code that you're going to write. All of that falls into this bucket. So at this juncture, you're ready to sort of take this story and you're actually going to implement it. I'm going to turn it over to George to take us through this part.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So, you know, at this point, we've gotten through the discover and formulate. That's really about getting your stories, whatever you're going to be working on, as to ready to pull into a sprint, an iteration, whatever your Agile framework calls it. When we get to automate, what we want to be able to do then is get it to done. And so automation is all about, as Raj was just saying, automating all of the tests that we need to have tests around, whether they're at the acceptance level with the specifications or down into the code at the unit level and any other tests that need to be written along the way. This is where we get to done. And so then that's really the segue into test-driven development, which, as Raj was saying, behavior-driven development emerged from. This was an early XP practice where the focus was on building the thing right. BDD is about building the right thing. Right here, we want to make sure that we are applying good design principles, engineering principles to make sure that we are building something with a good, solid design. So if we are going to do test-driven development, it's important to kind of reimagine the way that we think about approaching the whole task of writing tests. Typically, we might think about the implementation, then write some code, and then at the very end of that, write some test cases to verify the behavior that we want to see. But what we want instead is to write a test first to capture that expected behavior, and then think about the implementation that we need to meet the expectation and write just enough code to make that failing test pass. And that failing test is really a key principle to all of this. We want to make sure that we have a failing test first in order to then be able to verify that whatever that expected behavior was actually got built into the test. That is verified to be now a part of our system. And when we do this one test at a time, one failing test followed by the implementation, we incrementally build things one test at a time with the corresponding implementation to that. And what this all leads to then is this developer heartbeat that is very common in these agile engineering circles that is referred to as RedGreen Refactor. So we start by writing a test. That test needs to fail. We then write just enough code to get that failing test to pass. That passing test is now green. And then we go and make sure that we have designed things as well as we can, find any other code that needs to be refactored, and leave the campsite cleaner than we found it, as a metaphor there. And what this then does is that this turns developers who are following this practice into coders, testers, and designers all at once. We're wearing all of those hats because all of those activities are needed to be tightly interwoven as we use this approach.
And again, so just keep in mind that the built-in scenarios, or whatever language, common language you sort of captured, the boundaries of the stories can still help guide write a lot of the lower level tests. So in the TDD practice, we are using unit tests. We are writing tests, but you're using tests to drive the design in the product, right? So writing a unit test, writing code becomes one seamless activity, right? One reinforcing.
Right. And if you think back to one of those, that original picture with the team on the right, we want to make sure that there's a high degree of interaction and collaboration across the team, that developers don't just flee to their corners and do all this TDD in isolation. There needs to be good collaboration between developers, testers, business analysts, in order to understand what those test cases need to be, and that we have adequate coverage and maybe not too much redundant coverage. That should all be part of that test-driven conversation. Now, Raj and I are big believers in test-driven development and following this developer heartbeat, where you're writing that test first. That failing test is really important. We understand that this is a difficult mental shift to accomplish, and not everyone's going to latch onto it immediately. In the event that you don't follow true test-driven development, we at least urge you to adhere to these first principles of unit tests, which say that good unit tests are first fast, that they are isolated. So you want really good decoupling between all the parts of the code, and the test should be isolated to whatever it's really testing, not crossing architectural boundaries, that it's repeatable, that it's self-validating. You don't need any kind of human interaction in order to interpret whether the test passed or failed. But I think what's most important about this particular mnemonic is the T, which is that a good unit test must be timely. And by this, what we mean is that you should write your unit test as close in time to when you write your production code as possible. You know, don't wait until later in the day or later in the week, or cram it in at the end of your sprint. If you write it as close to when your production code is written, the likelihood that you will follow good design and engineering practices is much better. The quality of your test is likely to be much higher. You know, all of these good principles will likely be adhered to.
Hey, George, there was a question from Steve, just to clarify, fast. Are you talking about being able to write it fast, or
So great, yeah. So a unit test should really, if it's truly isolated, not crossing architectural boundaries, we want your unit tests to run extremely quickly. You know, in the milliseconds. They should be fast in that sense. At the same time, though, they shouldn't take you very long to write. I mean, if you're writing a super complicated unit test, then there might be some sort of a code smell associated with that. But really, the foundational notion here is that your test should execute super fast. You should be able to execute literally thousands of tests in a matter of a couple of minutes, truly. Okay. All right. So when you bring all of the automation together and have all of the conversations among your testers, developers, business, there should be a rather wide-ranging framework or set of testing tools that you would use in order to approximate a really good testing approach. So it's not just the unit test, but it's also these other tools that need to be brought in, Cucumber, SpecFlow, and in some architectural circles, in order to take those Gherkin scenarios, translate them into some step definitions, and through that you can automate those conversations that we had in behavior-driven development in order to layer that on top of your unit tests and have a
so these are functional tests.
These are the functional tests, yes.
So again, this is nobody's saying these are not important, but what we are sort of challenging is the notion that don't think of being test-driven or BDD just being about automating those specifications in isolation.
Right.
That's not, that goes completely against the spirit of BDD and TD.
Right. So the conversation we talked about, you want to make sure that the story that you have is valuable, feasible, testable. The automation right here that we're referring to is really the cherry on top. If you've done all the other stuff, this should be a lot easier. Essentially, it's the conversations that have to happen and the good collaboration to make sure that the stories that are coming into your sprint are truly verifiable. And then at the end of the sprint, you've done everything you can to actually verify that your tests pass, that you have built the right thing, and that you've built it the right way. Okay. All right, so back to you, Raj.
Yeah. So I know this has been sort of lightning talk here. Each of these probably warrants deeper questions and so forth, right? And hopefully we'll have time to sort of talk about that if there's any questions. But essentially, SUT stands for System Under Test. Yeah, that's there was a question. SUT, System Under Test. You're writing the specifications against whatever software system that you build. So to bring it all together, what does it really mean to be a test-driven team, right? So, George, can you hit the?
Yeah. All right.
So what it really means is to distill the essence of what we just talked over the past 20 minutes, 25 minutes is, bringing both the BDD and the TDD aspects together. First and foremost, making sure that you're having the right conversations with the right kind of people, making sure that those multiple perspectives are in attendance, whether it's 3 amigos or 3 plus, I'll leave that up to you. Making sure that we truly understand the customer needs. We're capturing that understanding via stories that are clarified by rules and examples, as we saw. That's the first part. Now then, formulation, making sure those rules and examples are codified in some common language. As I said, Gherkin is pretty ubiquitous these days as a way to capture those conversations. So that's the formulation part. And given that now you're ready to actually build the thing, you can use those specifications to drive the test-driven cycle that I've shown here, where the unit tests are driving the code one unit test at a time. So truly following the TDD rhythm. And as George said, even if your developers are not ready to fully embrace or appreciate TDD, at least make those tests timely, right? So too often we see where the unit tests are an afterthought, done way in. That's completely missing the point of TDD or even just the spirit of unit testing.
And actually, just another point of emphasis, writing unit tests in order to hit some sort of a testing target, a coverage target, is also contrary to the spirit. And if you're doing it, months after the code was originally written, the quality of those tests is probably questionable.
And then through the TDD cycle, if you're following TDD, you build the functional system, and then if you choose to automate those scenarios using Gherkin or Fitness, not Cucumber or Fitness, whatever tool, it really doesn't matter. Your functional automated tests, you could potentially automate them as well. So this really is the full, at least in our view, what it means to move from a test last kind of a mindset to a test-driven mindset, where there is that deeper collaboration across the roles, and truly embracing the spirit of what it means to be test-driven. Next slide. Again, just to summarize all of what we just discussed, why are we doing this? First and foremost, right, you want to make sure that there's a shared understanding of what that feature or story is. This drives to better quality. If you're following TDD, as my old mentor used to say, TDD is really not about testing, it's about design. And I'm sure that some of the folks in attendance here could sort of, who are TDD practitioners can sort of attest to that. It's about better design. And building only what's needed, because we are being very thoughtful and deliberate about the boundaries of those stories, rules, and examples. What's truly needed is what you're building. And as we saw, one of the key things we want to do, is to make sure that there's shared responsibility for quality, both the intrinsic quality as well as the extrinsic quality of the software that we're building. And this provides a mechanism as a forcing function to bring that the multiple perspectives to a common place. And then if you do all of this, it should hopefully allow for faster delivery, not in the least bit because you were going to have a higher level of automation through the unit test and the functional test, but also making sure, because there's no ambiguity as to what you're building, because you have that clear direction as to sprint to sprint, story to story, what's truly needed and what is it that you want to keep. Okay. All right. So anyway, just a summary slide to say, hopefully in this sort of a quick format, you're at least able to share with you why we think being test-driven is not just a testing practice or just about testing. Yes, there's elements of testing, but it's really more about better requirement specification. It is about better software design, all assisted and driven through tests, for sure.
One of the things, what problem we're trying to solve. Okay, so one of the problems we're trying to solve is bugs. Okay, this is like kind of fundamental, but the starter problem I like to have people think about if they're interested in reducing the number of bugs they create. Because the way most of the world programs is they do something called debug later programming.
Yeah.
And in debug later programming, we make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, guess what happens? I think I'm sharing the wrong thing. But this picture here, that means we have to find the mistakes. And it takes a long time. How long does it take to fix a bug? Well, test driven can make that time go down because the thing that's broken is the thing you just did. And so you get to work in a tight feedback loop. And so that's one of the key things, that what could a developer get from this? It all sounds wonderful. Oh, we can have test automation, but what can a developer get from it? They could spend less time getting bugs.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of other stuff too, but that's your starter problem. And if you're interested in having less bugs, then you might want to look into this.
Unit tests.
Oh, and then one other thing, just in case you people are wondering, this is not tedious. This is fun to do.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to forget about that. Writing tests afterwards, that's not fun. Writing tests as you go, that's a good time.
Right.
I used to believe this chart behind me, which is the benefit to test-driven development is in the future somewhere. But if you ask test-driven developers who actually know what they're, that actually do it, they tell you that they get their work done faster. And I've done some experiments with people in learning to find out, do people get things done faster with TDD? And I've kind of come to discover that there's a tie in the beginning.
Mhm.
Okay, so the time to get to when someone says it's done for an experienced test-driven developer is probably sooner than for a debug later programmer. Probably takes them longer before they both say they're done, but let's just call it a tie. The future for the debug later programmer means more debugs, more bugs, because there will be some, and manual retest time, which you can't afford. What the test-driven developer's advantage for the future will be, retest time is 0.
Yeah.
And how much time do you want to spend doing that thing you did before do you want to keep doing that every time you make a change? Or do you want to have something else do it? I'm going to choose have the automation do it where it's suitable for the automation to do it.